The sky was dark with smoke, the ground covered in black ash. Once, this alien village might have been filled with laughter, markets, and bright colors, but now it was nothing more than broken walls and burned homes. The air was thick with the smell of fire and something far worse, loss. Daniel, a human traveler, moved slowly through the ruins. His boots crunched over bits of glass and fallen wood. He had seen war before, but this felt different. This was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Every street was empty, every door burned, and the silence pressed on his ears like a weight. Somewhere in the distance, metal creaked in the wind. A half-broken water tower swayed dangerously. Daniel scanned the ruins with sharp eyes, his rifle ready, though there was no one in sight. He was only here because his ship's scanner had picked up strange heat signals, small, faint, almost like the trace of a heartbeat. At first, he thought it might be a malfunction, but then he heard it. A soft sound, a whimper. Daniel froze. He turned toward the noise, his eyes narrowing. It came from somewhere near the collapsed market stalls. Slowly, he stepped over the debris, following the sound. The closer he got, the clearer it became wasn't an animal. It was a child. His boots stopped just short of a pile of charred cloth and broken crates. And there, crouched in the ashes, was a small alien girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her skin a pale violet smudged with soot. Her hair, a soft silver white, hung in tangled strands over her face. She was clutching something tightly in her hands, a piece of cloth. Daniel realized with a twist in his stomach that it was part of a burned scarf. Beside her were 2 shapes covered with fabric. The bodies were still. Daniel didn't need to lift the covers to know they weren't breathing. The girl didn't notice him at first. She was staring at the ground, whispering in her own language. Her voice cracked with every word, like she had been crying for hours. Daniel crouched down slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey," he said softly, though he knew she probably wouldn't understand. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." Her head lifted. Her eyes, large, bright, and filled with tears, met his. They were the kind of eyes that could make even the coldest man stop in his tracks. She said something in her tongue. The words were shaky, uncertain. Daniel blinked, not understanding. I don't know what that means," he admitted gently. She repeated it again, this time with a little more strength. Her voice trembled less, like she was trying to be brave. Later, Daniel would learn what it meant. She had asked, "Are you my father now?" For a moment, Daniel's throat tightened. The question hit harder than any weapon could. He reached a hand toward her, slow and careful. She flinched at first, but didn't run. Inch by inch, her tiny violet fingers reached out, touching his gloved hand like she wasn't sure if he was real. "Come on," Daniel whispered, glancing around. The ruins were too quiet, too still. He didn't like it. "We can't stay here." But just as he was about to help her up, a sound cut through the silence. Boots, heavy, uneven footsteps echoed from somewhere down the street. Daniel's muscles tensed instantly. He knew that sound. It wasn't a patrol. It was scavengers. The kind of people who came after battles looking for loot, or survivors to sell. The girl heard it too. Her small hands clutched at his sleeve. Her lips moved in a silent plea. Daniel's eyes swept the street, searching for an escape. He spotted an old transport vehicle, half hidden under fallen beams. It looked ancient, maybe even broken, but it was their only chance. "Stay close to me," he told her, motioning for her to follow. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled up, still holding onto his arm. The footsteps were getting closer. A rough voice shouted something in the alien language, but Daniel didn't need to understand to know it was bad. They moved quickly, slipping through the rubble, keeping low. Twice, Daniel had to pause as shadows passed nearby. The girl pressed herself against him each time, shaking but silent. Finally, they reached the transport. Daniel yanked the door open. It groaned loudly. Too loud, but there was no time to worry about noise. He lifted the girl inside, then climbed in after her. The dashboard was covered in dust, wires hanging loose. He muttered under his breath and pressed the ignition. At first, nothing happened. The engine coughed, clicked, then died. The voices outside grew louder. They were close, now only seconds away. Daniel slammed his fist against the console and twisted the key again. This time, the engine gave a low, grumbling roar. Lights flickered weakly. "Hold on," he said. The girl gripped the seat so tightly. Her knuckles turned pale. Daniel slammed the vehicle into gear. The old transport lurched forward, just as figures appeared at the edge of the street. Shouts rang out, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Bullets or something like them pinged against the metal hull as they sped away. The girl ducked low, clutching the scarf to her chest, eyes wide with fear. Daniel kept his focus on the road ahead, pushing the engine as hard as it could go. The village vanished behind them, swallowed by smoke. In that moment, with danger still chasing them, he knew one thing: he wasn't leaving her. Not now, not ever. The old transport rattled and shook as it sped across the cracked road. Every bump made the loose panels clatter like bones. Daniel kept one hand tight on the steering wheel, the other near his weapon. The vehicle was ancient, barely holding together, but right now it was their only hope. Beside him, the little alien girl sat curled up in the seat, clutching her scarf so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Her wide eyes flicked between Daniel's face and the dark shapes rushing past the windows in the rearview mirror. Faint lights began to appear, 3, maybe 4, moving fast. The raiders had found another transport. Daniel cursed under his breath. "They're chasing us." The girl didn't understand the words, but she saw his expression and stiffened. She said something quick and urgent in her language, her small hands gripping the seat. "Yeah," he muttered, keeping his eyes on the road. "I know. Hold on." The road ahead split into 2 narrow paths. One led down a straight stretch toward the open plains, the other twisted into a winding canyon where shadows swallowed the ground. The plains would be faster, but the raiders' vehicles were faster than his. The canyon would slow everyone down, maybe slow them enough to escape. Daniel swerved hard, sending the transport down the canyon path. The metal walls groaned at the sudden turn, and the girl let out a tiny gasp, holding onto the dashboard. The canyon was darker than he expected. The only light came from the weak glow of the dashboard and the pale moonlight spilling between the jagged cliffs above. The air smelled of dust and stone. Behind them, the roar of engines grew louder. The raiders were following. Daniel pushed the accelerator to the floor. The old transport coughed but obeyed, bouncing over uneven rocks. The girl was thrown against her seat. But she didn't complain. Her eyes stayed locked on the dark tunnel ahead. Like she knew speaking might break whatever thin luck they had left. A shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. A flash of blue energy streaked past the vehicle, striking the rock beside them. Bits of stone exploded, peppering the windshield. Daniel jerked the wheel. "Hang on!" The girl gasped again, this time louder. She ducked down, curling into herself, her scarf still clutched in her tiny hands. The raiders were closing in. Their shouts echoed in the canyon, their words full of hunger, not for food, but for the kind of profit only a rare living prize could bring. Daniel had seen it before. He had stopped it before. Never with a child in his care. A sharp bend appeared ahead, hidden in the darkness. Daniel turned sharply, tires screeching. The transport nearly tipped on its side before slamming back down. The raiders weren't so lucky one of their smaller vehicles hit the bend too hard, slamming into the rock wall. The sound of metal crunching filled the canyon. One down, Daniel muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. But the others didn't slow. Two more vehicles stayed on his tail, their headlights bouncing wildly as they hit the same rough terrain. The canyon began to narrow, the walls closing in until Daniel could almost reach out and touch them. This was both good and bad. Good because the raiders couldn't pass him. Bad because one wrong move would smash them against stone. The girl peeked up from her seat, eyes darting to the mirror. She saw the chasing lights, then looked at Daniel with a mix of fear and trust. Slowly, she reached out, placing her small hand on his arm. He glanced at her, just for a second. She didn't speak, but her touch said enough. Don't stop. Please don't stop. A low rumble rolled through the canyon. At first, Daniel thought it was more raiders, but then he realized it was the canyon itself. Somewhere ahead, rocks were falling. The sound grew louder. Pebbles bounced onto the road. A shadow moved above a massive boulder, breaking loose. Hold. Untight. Daniel shouted. The girl grabbed the seat with both hands. The boulder came crashing down, smashing into the canyon floor right in front of them. Daniel swerved at the last second, the transport scraping against the wall but slipping past. The raiders behind weren't so lucky. One swerved too late, clipping the boulder and spinning out in a shower of sparks. Only one set of lights remained in the mirror now. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept pushing forward. The canyon began to open up again, spilling them out into a wide stretch of desert lit by the cold light of two moons. The last raider vehicle roared after them, but Daniel spotted something ahead, a dry riverbed with steep sides. If he could get the transport down into it without flipping, maybe they could lose them. He aimed for the drop. The girl's eyes widened, realizing what he was about to do. She shook her head quickly, pointing to the deep slope like it was impossible. Trust me, Daniel said. The transport hit the edge and dropped hard into the riverbed, landing with a bone-shaking crash. The suspension screamed, but the vehicle kept moving. Dust exploded around them, hiding them from sight. The raiders reached the edge. But Daniel turned sharply, taking the transport into a narrow cut in the riverbed wall. It was almost invisible. From above, they drove in silence for several minutes. The only sounds, the hum of the engine and the girl's quick breathing. Eventually, the lights behind them disappeared. Daniel finally slowed the transport, pulling into the shadow of an overhanging rock. He cut the engine. Silence returned, heavy and thick. The girl looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and placed her scarf over his wounded forearm. She said something softly. He didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was saying, "Thank you." Daniel leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. They had escaped, for now. But this night was far from over. The desert was quiet now, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, as if the night itself was listening. The moons cast a pale silver light over the dry riverbed where Daniel had hidden the transport. Inside the vehicle, the little alien girl sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, the scarf still clutched tightly in her hands. She hadn't spoken since they stopped. Her eyes followed Daniel as he moved around, checking the engine, then the surrounding area. When he finally climbed back inside, he noticed the way she watched him, not with fear, exactly, but with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "You're safe now," Daniel said, his voice low. "No one's going to hurt you while I'm here." Of course, he knew she didn't understand the words, but tone could carry meaning even when language didn't. She blinked at him, her face unreadable, then slowly looked down at her scarf. Again, Daniel opened a small pack from the storage compartment and pulled out a metal canteen. He took a sip, then held it out to her. She stared at it for several seconds before shaking her head. "It's water," Daniel said, taking another sip to show her. "See? Safe." Still, she didn't take it. Instead, she gestured for him to drink more. Only when he had swallowed again did she finally reach out and take the canteen from his hands. Daniel realized then she had been afraid he might try to poison her. His chest tightened at the thought of how much she must have seen to make her. So cautious, she drank slowly, her small hands gripping the canteen like it was the most precious thing in the world. When she was done, she handed it back without a word. "Hungry?" Daniel asked. He reached into his pack and pulled out a protein bar, breaking it in half. He offered her one piece. Again, she didn't take it immediately. She waited until he took a bite first. Only then did she nibble at hers, chewing carefully, like someone who wasn't used to eating much at all. They ate in silence, the sound of the night wind whistling faintly outside. After a while, the girl's eyes began to droop. She fought to keep them open, her head jerking up each time it started to fall. Daniel realized she was trying not to sleep, maybe afraid she'd wake up and find him gone. "It's all right," he murmured. He stood, grabbed an old blanket from the back of the transport, and placed it over her shoulders. She flinched at first, then relaxed slightly under the warmth. Daniel took the driver's seat, leaning back against it. He kept his rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the riverbed. The desert could hide many dangers. Raiders weren't the only predators out here at some point. He heard a small sound behind him. Turning his head, he saw the girl had left her seat and was now sitting on the floor, closer to him. She had the blanket wrapped tightly around her, her silver hair catching the moonlight from the window. "You don't trust me enough to sleep far away, huh?" Daniel said softly. She didn't answer, of course, but she leaned her head against the side of the seat near his leg. It was a silent message. "I'll stay close." Just in case, Daniel tried not to think about how small and fragile she looked. Instead, he kept his eyes on the darkness outside. Hours passed. The wind picked up, carrying the dry smell of sand. Every now and then, Daniel thought he saw movement in the distance, but it was hard to tell if it was real or just shadows. Sometime before dawn, the girl stirred, muttering softly in her own language. Her voice trembled, and Daniel realized she was dreaming, no, reliving something. Her breathing quickened, and she let out a sharp cry. Daniel turned quickly and crouched beside her. "Hey, it's all right. You're safe." She woke with a start, her eyes wide and panicked. For a moment, she didn't recognize him, but then she did. Instead of pulling away, she reached for his arm. Daniel hesitated, then rested his hand lightly over hers. She held on tight, her fingers trembling. It took a while for her breathing to slow. Eventually, she let go, curling back under the blanket. But this time, she didn't keep her distance. She leaned against him, as if being near him kept the nightmares away. Daniel stayed still, listening to her soft breathing as she drifted back to sleep. When the first light of dawn began to creep into the riverbed, Daniel knew they couldn't stay here much longer. Raiders might still be searching, and the heat of the desert would be brutal once the sun was fully up. He started the transport as quietly as possible. The rumble of the engine made the girl stir, but she didn't wake fully. Instead, she mumbled something that sounded almost like a human word. Daniel leaned closer, trying to catch it. It was broken, clumsy, but he was sure she had said safe. Daniel sat back, staring at her for a moment. She was still asleep, her face soft in the morning light. Safe. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of something. Maybe trust, maybe more. He glanced toward the horizon. There was still a long way to go, and the danger was far from over. But now, for the first time since he'd found her, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. He shifted the vehicle into gear and drove toward the rising sun. the little alien. Girl sleeping beside him, and the fragile bond between them slowly beginning to grow. The morning sun was harsh over the desert, turning the pale sand into a blinding sheet of gold. The old transport groaned with every mile, its engine making a low, grinding sound that told Daniel it wouldn't last forever. Leoratha was the name Daniel had learned last night, sat beside him, hugging her scarf. She didn't speak much, only glancing at him from time to time with those wide, cautious eyes. Every so often, Daniel caught her watching the horizon, as if expecting the raiders to appear again at any moment. The quiet between them was broken by the crackle of Daniel's communicator. A faint human voice came through, fuzzy but clear enough. "Daniel, this is Outpost 12. We received your signal. State your status." Daniel picked it up, holding it close to his mouth. "I've got a survivor. Young alien needs medical attention and shelter. Can you receive us?" There was a pause on the other end. "Bring her in, but be aware protocol for alien refugees has changed. Command will decide if she can stay." Daniel's grip on the communicator tightened. He knew what protocol. Men tests, interviews, and if someone decided she was too much trouble, she'd be left behind. He kept his voice even. "Understood. We're on our way." When he lowered the device, he noticed Leora staring at him. She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to sense the tension in his voice. She reached over and tugged at his sleeve. "Father, leave," she asked in broken English. Daniel blinked. It was the second time she'd used that word. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "I'm not leaving you." She tilted her head, searching his face for truth. Then, she said something in her own language, slower this time, like she wanted him to remember it. "I don't know what that means," he admitted, "but I'll figure it out." The road ahead narrowed, twisting between jagged cliffs. Daniel eased the transport forward, his eyes scanning the shadows. Places like this were perfect for an ambush. Halfway through the pass, he caught movement, 3 figures on the rocks. Above, raiders down. He barked, pushing Leora toward the floor. Ah! Burst of gunfire rang out, shards of rock raining down on the transport's roof. Daniel slammed the accelerator. The old vehicle roared in protest but surged forward. More shots followed, some pinging off the metal, one punching a hole through the windshield. "Stay low," he shouted again, gripping the wheel. A figure dropped from above, landing on the roof with a heavy thud. Daniel felt the metal dent under the weight. A shadow moved across the cracked glass as the raider tried to smash his way inside. Daniel swerved violently, throwing the man off balance. The raider clung to the edge, shouting. In his language, Daniel grabbed his sidearm and fired upward through the roof. A scream followed, then silence. When the road finally opened up again, Daniel slowed just enough to check on Leora. She was still curled on the floor, trembling but unharmed. Her eyes locked on his, and in that moment he could see the question. In them, "How long will you protect me?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the vehicle to the side, shutting off the engine. He crouched down so they were at eye level. "Listen," he said, speaking slowly, hoping she might catch a word or two. "I don't know what's going to happen when we get to the outpost, but I'm not leaving you. Not for raiders, not for command, not for anyone, you understand." She stared at him for a long moment, then reached out and placed her tiny hand over his. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Promise." Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't promised anything to anyone. In years not since the war. But now, looking at her, he realized he meant it more than he'd meant anything in a long time. "I promise," he said. For the first time, a small, fragile smile touched her lips, but their moment was short-lived. From somewhere far behind, an engine roared deep, powerful, and getting closer. Daniel's expression hardened. The raiders weren't done yet. He jumped back into the driver's seat, starting the engine. "Hold on, Leora, we've got company." The roar grew louder until a dark speck appeared on the horizon, a larger, heavier vehicle than the ones from last night. It was built for pursuit, and it was gaining fast. Daniel pushed the transport harder, the engine screaming in protest. The land ahead was rough dips, ridges, and patches of loose sand. He knew if the wheels sank, they were finished. The raider vehicle drew closer, its mounted guns swiveling toward them. The first shot hit the ground just beside the transport, sending sand spraying against the windows. Daniel spotted a rocky ridge ahead, with a narrow gap just wide enough for his vehicle. If he could get through before the raiders, they might block the bigger vehicle from following. He veered toward it. Leora clutched the seat, eyes wide. The gap rushed toward them. Daniel gritted his teeth, forcing the transport through with barely inches to spare. Metal scraped against stone, sparks flying, but they made it. Behind them, the larger raider vehicle tried to follow and got stuck halfway. Its engine roared in frustration, but it wasn't moving anywhere. Daniel didn't stop. He drove until the ridge disappeared behind them and the desert stretched out empty once more. Only then did he slow. Glancing at Leora, she was still gripping the seat. But when she looked at him, her fear had softened. She pointed at him and said one word, clear enough for him to understand. "Father." Daniel didn't correct her. He just gave a small nod, eyes forward. The promise was made, and he intended to keep it. The sun was dipping low, bleeding orange and red across the desert sky. Daniel knew they couldn't travel much farther without rest. The transport's engine was running hot, and Leora had barely eaten all day. They needed shelter before nightfall. He found it in the form of an old cargo station, half buried in the sand. The roof sagged, and one of the walls had collapsed long ago, but the interior was still mostly intact. It would give them cover from the wind and a little safety while he worked on the transport. "Come on," Daniel said, holding out a hand to Leora. She hesitated, scanning the shadows inside before taking it. They entered carefully. Daniel checked every corner with his rifle before setting his pack down. Leora stayed close, following him like a shadow. He found a small water tank in the corner, still holding a few liters. After making sure it was clean, he filled the canteen and handed it to her. She drank slowly, eyes never leaving him. When she finished, she tugged at his sleeve, saying something in her language. He didn't understand, but her tone was clear. She wanted him to rest too. Daniel gave a small smile. "I'll rest after I fix the engine." She frowned, not understanding the words, but catching his meaning. Still, she sat down nearby, keeping him in sight. For the first hour, all was quiet. The wind howled outside, rattling loose panels, and sand hissed across the roof. Daniel worked on the transport with one ear always listening for danger. It came when he least expected it. A faint click metal on metal from the doorway. Daniel's head snapped up. A shadow moved. He didn't get the chance to raise his rifle. Something slammed into the back of his head, sending him sprawling. His vision blurred, and through the haze, he saw Leora's eyes go wide in fear. Two figures rushed in, both wearing scavenger gear with long, tattered cloaks. One grabbed Leora. The other kicked Daniel's weapon away. Leora screamed, thrashing against her captor. She shouted words Daniel didn't understand, her voice high and desperate. The man holding her snarled something in his own tongue, yanking her closer. Daniel forced himself up, lunging forward. But a heavy boot slammed into his chest, knocking the air out of him. "You shouldn't have come here, human." The other man growled in broken English. "She's worth more than you can imagine." Daniel's vision cleared enough to see the insignia on their gear raiders. The same group that had been chasing them since the village. The man holding Leora began dragging her toward the door. She reached for Daniel, screaming again. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. Something inside Daniel snapped. With a sharp breath, he lunged for the nearest raider, slamming his shoulder into the man's ribs. The impact sent them both crashing into the wall. Daniel fought with raw desperation, landing a punch before the other raider grabbed him from behind. A blow to his head sent him stumbling. Another strike dropped him to his knees. His body screamed in protest, but his mind refused to stop. "Run, Ata," he shouted to Leora. She tried her small feet, scrambling. For the open door, but the raider's grip was iron. He lifted her easily. Ignoring her kicks and nails raking against his arm, Daniel reached for his sidearm, but a boot came down on his hand, grinding it into the floor. Pain flared white-hot. The raiders exchanged a few words in their own language. Then one of them hauled Daniel up and slammed him against the wall. "You follow, you die," the man hissed. Daniel glared back, blood running down his temple. "If you hurt her," the raider's fist cut him off, smashing into his jaw. Daniel hit the ground hard, the world tilting by the time he pushed himself up. They were gone. The only sounds left were the wind outside and his own ragged breathing. Daniel stumbled to the doorway, scanning the desert. Far in the distance, he saw a small skiff kicking up sand as it sped away. Leora was in the back, her silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. She was still struggling, still shouting his name, more at least the words she used for him. Father, Daniel's fists clenched, his promise echoed in his mind. "I'm not leaving you, not for anyone." He staggered back inside, grabbing his rifle and checking the transport. The engine wasn't fully repaired, but it would have to do. He threw supplies into the passenger seat, his movements sharp and fast. The sun was gone now, replaced by the cold glow of the moons. The raiders would think the darkness gave them cover. They didn't know Daniel. He started the engine. It coughed, then roared to life. The transport lurched forward, tearing through the sand in pursuit of the fading skiff trail. Every bump and turn rattled the vehicle, but Daniel's focus was locked ahead. Could almost hear Leora's voice in the wind, calling to him. Somewhere out there, she was terrified and alone. And somewhere out there, the men who had taken her were already planning to sell her to the highest bidder. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel. They had no idea the mistake they'd made. The moonlight spilled across the desert like cold silver as Daniel followed the faint trail of the raider's skiff. The sand was churned in a straight line, broken only where the wind had already begun to sweep it away. He pushed the transport hard, the old engine groaning, the wheels spitting up grit. Every mile stretched his patience thinner. He could see Leora in his mind, small, frightened, clutching her scarf. Surrounded by men who saw her as nothing more than profit. His promise echoed again. "I'm not leaving you. Not for anyone." The trail led toward a jagged cluster of rock spires known on local maps as the Needle Teeth. They rose sharp and black against the night sky, their narrow gaps perfect for hiding. Raiders often used this place. It was easy to defend and almost impossible to approach unseen. Daniel killed the engine a good mile out. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, checked the knife at his belt, and began to walk on foot. The wind here was cruel, whistling through the stone like an eerie song. Shadows danced along the rocks, playing tricks on his eyes. But Daniel kept low, moving from cover to cover until the faint glow of a campfire appeared between two pillars of stone. He dropped to his stomach and crawled closer. From his vantage point, he saw the raiders' camp. 3 skiffs parked in a half-circle, makeshift tents set up between them, and a cage at the center. Leora sat inside, her knees drawn to her chest. Her scarf was gone, her silver hair catching the firelight. A tall raider paced near her cage, while two others argued over a crate of supplies. Their voices carried through the night. Daniel caught enough words to understand they were discussing a buyer. They planned to leave by dawn. Daniel's jaw tightened. He counted 6 men in total, maybe more, hidden in the tents. This wouldn't be easy. He took a slow breath, scanning the camp for weak points. A small sandstorm was brewing on the horizon. If it reached here, visibility would drop. That could be his chance. He waited. The wind began to pick up, scattering grit into the fire and making the raiders curse. One of them pulled a cloth over his face. Another went to secure the skiffs. The man pacing near Leora moved to help. Leaving her unguarded for a few precious moments, Daniel moved. He slipped between the shadows, keeping low, his boots silent in the sand. The storm's first wave hit, dimming the camp's light. The fire. Guttered, he reached the cage, crouching beside it. Leora's eyes widened in shock, then relief. She moved toward him, whispering something in her own tongue. Daniel murmured, working at the crude lock with his knife. "We're getting out of here." The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Leora hesitated, glancing toward the men. Daniel gestured quickly. "Come on," she slid out, clutching his arm. They moved toward the edge of the camp, but one of the raiders spotted movement. A shout went up. Daniel shoved Leora behind a skiff and turned to face the oncoming danger. The first raider charged, swinging a blade. Daniel caught his arm and drove his elbow into the man's throat. Sending him to the ground, two more emerged from the storm. Daniel fired twice, each shot dropping a man before he could close in. The wind howled louder, reducing visibility to a blur of shapes. "Stay close." Daniel shouted over the storm, grabbing Leora's hand. They wove between the skiffs, heading for the outer rocks. A raider lunged out of the storm, grabbing Leora. She screamed. Daniel spun, slamming his shoulder into the attacker and knocking him back. The man drew a pistol, but Daniel was faster. One hard strike with his rifle butt sent the weapon skidding into the sand. Daniel kicked it away and dragged Leora toward the gap between the rocks. Behind them, shouts turned into chaos as the storm swallowed the camp. The raiders couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Daniel and Leora stumbled out of the needle teeth, the transport barely visible through the dust. They climbed inside, Daniel starting the engine with shaking hands. The old vehicle roared to life, wheels spinning as they tore away from the rocks. The storm swallowed the camp behind them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the engine and the rush of wind outside. Finally, Leora shifted closer, clutching her scarf, the same one he had thought lost. She must have grabbed it before they escaped. She looked up at him, her voice trembling but clear enough for him to understand. "You came." Daniel glanced down at her. "I told you I'm not leaving you." Her eyes glistened. She didn't say anything more, just leaned against him, small and warm in the cold night. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting protectively over hers. The camp was gone, but danger wasn't over yet. Still, in that moment, he knew the hardest part was behind them. He had her back, and no one was taking her again. The first light of dawn stretched over the desert, turning the sand from silver to gold. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind a strange stillness. The air was cooler now, and in that quiet, Daniel finally saw the outline of the human outpost rising in the distance. It wasn't much, just a scattering of metal structures, a tall watchtower and a landing pad, but to Daniel, it meant safety, or at least a chance at it. Leora sat beside him in the transport, clutching her scarf like a lifeline. Her silver hair was tangled from the wind, her violet skin still marked with smudges of dirt. She hadn't spoken much since the rescue, though. Her hand had stayed in his from the moment they left the needle. Teeth as the outpost grew closer. Daniel slowed the vehicle. A pair of armed guards stepped forward, weapons at the ready. One of them a tall woman in a dusty uniform raised her hand. "Identify yourself," she called. "Daniel Rourke," he replied. "Freelance scout. I've got a survivor child, alien, injured, needs shelter and care." The guards exchanged a glance before the woman gestured toward the gate. "Bring her in. Command will want to see you." The metal gates slid open with a deep groan. Inside, the outpost buzzed with early morning activity. Engineers moved equipment, soldiers patrolled the perimeter, and the smell of strong coffee mixed with the scent of metal and dust. Daniel guided the transport into a covered bay. As soon as it stopped, medics approached, one of them reaching for Leora. She shrank back instantly, her hand tightening around Daniel's. "It's okay," Daniel told her gently. "They're here to help." But she didn't let go. The medic looked to Daniel. "We need to take her for medical evaluation." "Refugee protocol." Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd heard those words before, and he didn't like what they meant: separation, questioning, sometimes weeks of uncertainty before a decision was made about a refugee's future. He crouched down so he was eye level with Leora. "I'm not going anywhere. Do you understand? I'll be right there when you come out." She studied him for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. Still, her fingers didn't loosen until he promised again, "I'm not leaving you." Reluctantly, she let the medics guide her away. Daniel followed, refusing to let her out of his sight. They entered the infirmary, a brightly lit room with rows of cots. Leora was given a blanket and clean water while a medic scanned her for injuries. The scanner beeped softly, and the medic nodded. Malnourished, dehydrated, but no lasting damage. "She's lucky you found her when you did." Daniel glanced at Leora. She was watching him even as the medic worked, her small hands clutching the edge of the blanket. Before he could respond, a voice came from the doorway. "Rourke." It was the outpost commander, a broad-shouldered man with a sharp gaze. "You brought in an undocumented alien. You know the regulations. She need to be transferred to Central for processing." Daniel stood, his voice calm but edged. "She's been through hell. She needs safety, not another cell." "Protocol is protocol," the commander replied. "If she's cleared, she can stay. Until then, no." The word came out sharper than Daniel intended, but he didn't care. "She's not going anywhere without me. Try, and I walk out of here with her, right now." The commander studied him for a long moment. Then, perhaps seeing the steel in Daniel's eyes, he sighed. "Fine, you can stay with her during processing. But she stays on base." Daniel gave a short nod. "Deal." The commander left, and Daniel turned back to Leora. She was staring at him, eyes wide. She didn't understand the conversation, but she had understood one thing: that he had fought to keep her with him. She slid off the cot and walked to him, her blanket trailing behind. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She wrapped her arms around him. Daniel froze for a second, then gently returned the hug. Her voice was muffled against his chest, but he heard it clearly. "Father." He didn't correct her. Instead, he rested his hand on her head. "Yeah, I guess I am now." They stayed like that for a long moment before a medic came over with a tray of food. Leora ate slowly at first, then with more eagerness once she realized no one would take it from her. Daniel sat beside her, watching her with a quiet sense of relief. For the first time since he'd found her in the ashes, she looked almost at peace. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, dangerous and unforgiving. But inside these walls, for now, there was safety. And for Leora, there was something more: someone who had promised not to leave. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He didn't know what the future would hold or how long they'd be allowed to stay here. But one thing was certain. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, because she wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was his daughter.